It was July 29th, 1985. The kind of summer afternoon that should have passed unnoticed. But for one woman jogging near Lake Michigan, unknown to her, that day had already been decided for her long before she tied her shoes. Her name was Penny Burnson. She was attacked, brutally assaulted, left for dead. And in a town desperate for justice and quick answers, it wouldn't be long before someone was chosen to pay. Someone that didn't fit in. His name was Stephen Avery. He wasn't exactly a stranger to trouble, but he wasn't dangerous either. Stephen was 23, a quiet guy, a father. He worked in his family scrapyard off a dirt road that few traveled unless they needed parts or were lost. But in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, sometimes a name is all you need to become a suspect, even if that name is innocent. Stephen Avery would later have 18 alibi witnesses place him miles away from the attack when it happened. 18. But those witnesses lived where Avery lived. They were the wrong kind of people. Blue-collar, reclusive, the type that didn't golf with cops or buy ads in local newspapers. And the police? They didn't care about the grocery store receipt marked 5:13 p.m. when the assault took place miles away. What they had was a feeling and a photo. A mugshot from a small time prior arrest, and when they showed it to Penny, she picked him. She would later say she was sure. And in that moment, Stephen Avery's fate was sealed. Despite the evidence, despite the witnesses, despite no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair, no blood, no forensic trace of any kind, he was arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced to 32 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Behind bars, Stephen's world fell apart. His kids were raised without him. His marriage dissolved. Time bent in ways only the wrongfully imprisoned understand. And yet, he never gave up. Year after year. Again and again, he told anyone who would listen. I was innocent. I was miles away. Check the damn evidence. But the courts didn't listen. No one wanted to admit the system had failed. Until years later, science forced them to. In the late 1990s, the Wisconsin Innocence Project picked up Avery's file. At first glance, they saw what others refused to. The case was paper thin. No forensic link, no proper investigation, and mounting evidence of tunnel vision by the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. So they pushed to get the scrap of evidence from 1985 retested with the modern DNA methods now used to exonerate the innocent. It took time, it took lawyers, it took courage. But in 2003, the results came back. It wasn't Stephen Avery. The attacker had been Gregory Allen, a name well known to Manitowoc police at the time. And get this, he was under surveillance. The sheriff's department knew Gregory Allen was dangerous, but they still chose Stephen Avery. So after 18 years of lost birthdays, missed milestones, and shackled hope, Stephen Avery walked out of prison a free man. And for a moment, it looked like there might finally be justice. After all, until the questions started. Because how do you get a man convicted when the real suspect was known the entire time? Why had evidence been ignored? Why didn't the squad investigating Allen ever hand that file over? people started asking those questions. And Stephen Avery, he filed a civil lawsuit, $36 million, against Manitowoc County, its prosecutors, and its law enforcement departments. He wanted answers. He wanted the truth. And maybe he thought they'd leave him alone. But 2 years later, another woman went missing. Her name was Teresa Halbach, 25 years old, a freelance photographer. She'd been hired by Auto Trader magazine to take pictures of a van for sale on October 31st, 2005. The location? Avery's salvage yard, the same property Stephen lived on, the same man, recently freed, widely watched, and publicly suing the very department that had locked him away 20 years too early. Teresa never came home. Her last known appointment was at the Avery property. And when police arrived there, what they found sparked one of the most controversial cases of the 21st century. A burned car, a freshly discovered car key sitting in Avery's bedroom. Bones discovered in a fire pit just outside his home. And later, a confession from Stephen's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. But here's where it starts to fall apart, because that confession, it didn't quite make sense. Brendan had an IQ barely above 70. His interview lasted hours, no lawyer, no parent. And the detectives? They fed him scene after scene, and he agreed, yeah, that's what I did, even when the details made no physical sense. When they asked, what happened to her head? He said, they cut her hair. When they pushed again, no, what happened to her head? Only then did he say she was shot. The gun, by the way, discovered later and mysteriously wiped clean. And the car key? Photographed in plain sight on top of Stephen's bedroom floor, but not on any crime scene photos police had taken during their first 6 visits. It just appeared. And guess who found it? An officer from Manitowoc County, the very department Stephen Avery was suing at the time. And somehow, without a warrant, without a signed release, they were still allowed on scene. And just like that, after 18 years of prison, 2 years of freedom, Stephen Avery was arrested. Again, this time for murder. Teresa Halbach was dead, and suddenly, history was repeating itself. But this time, even deeper questions swirled. They said the system worked, that this time, justice wasn't blind, it was swift. Stephen Avery, the man who once walked out of prison after 18 years for a crime he didn't commit, was now back behind bars. And this time, the world was told it was his own doing. They said he'd lured a young photographer, Teresa Halbach, to his family's salvage yard under the guise of selling a car. That he trapped her, ended her life, tried to destroy the evidence in a bonfire behind his house. The headlines were brutal. The public reaction, immediate. This proves it, they said. Some people never change. They pointed to his prior conviction, his rugged demeanor, the years spent behind bars. They called him a manipulator, a predator, a man with a dark side hiding in plain sight. But what they didn't say was who stood to lose everything if Stephen Avery stayed free. Because at the time of Teresa's disappearance, Stephen was in the middle of suing Manitowoc County. A $36 million lawsuit, one that could have exposed decades of misconduct. That civil case wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about accountability. It was about a system on the brink of exposure. And suddenly, a tragedy emerged that would change the course of that lawsuit forever. Teresa Halbach, 25 years old, a freelance photographer known for her kindness, her curiosity, and her camera. She was sent to the Avery salvage yard to take photos for Auto Trader magazine, something she'd done many times before. But this time, she didn't return. Her family reported her missing. 3 days passed, then 4. The case gained traction fast. Media attention exploded. Police searched fields, forests, and farmland, and then something unexpected. On November 5th, a volunteer searcher named Pam Sturm entered the Avery property. She had a camera, a notepad, and a printed map. Within 30 minutes, she found Teresa's vehicle, a green Toyota RAV4, tucked behind rows of wrecked cars. Its license plate was concealed, the doors locked. Law enforcement swarmed the scene. But here's where things started to unravel. That vehicle had allegedly been sitting there for days. Days during which the yard was under surveillance. Drones, helicopters, patrol cars, and somehow no one had spotted it. Until Pam. Within hours, officers from Manitowoc County were inside Avery's home. Without a warrant, without supervision. They entered bedrooms, garages, sheds, and then the evidence started appearing. The first major piece was Teresa's car key. It was found on the floor of Stephen's bedroom after 7 separate searches. Not the first time, not the second, but the 7th. Tests showed Stephen's DNA on it, specifically sweat. But there was none of Teresa's DNA, no fingerprints, no skin oils, no evidence she had ever touched it. Even though it was allegedly her primary key, a key used daily. Now, strangely pristine. Next came a bullet fragment in the garage. Investigators claimed it had passed through Teresa. But independent testing, no traces of blood, no organic tissue, only trace DNA from Teresa, found weeks later under controversial lab conditions. The garage showed no blood spatter, no damage to match a violent confrontation, no cleanup evidence. In fact, the entire scene looked untouched. Brendan Dassey was 16, Stephen's quiet, shy nephew. He had a learning disability, an IQ below average, and no attorney present when he was interrogated. Over a 4-hour session, investigators questioned him without a parent or advocate. At first, Brendan denied everything, over and over again. But then, the tone shifted. Investigators fed him suggestions, corrected his answers, asked leading questions. Eventually, Brendan told a story, one that matched what the detectives seemed to want to hear. That he had helped his uncle commit the crime, that they had both been there, that it happened in Stephen's trailer, that a fire was used to cover it up. But when law enforcement searched for physical evidence to back up the story, there was none. No blood, no binding materials, no weapons, no sign of cleanup, no struggle. And yet, that confession alone sealed his fate. In 2007, Brendan Dassey was sentenced to life in prison. Stephen Avery followed. 2 lives, 2 convictions, based on a story with holes and evidence that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Years later, a Netflix series dropped like a bombshell, making A Murderer aired globally. And the public perception of the case began to shift. People across the world questioned the conviction. Reddit forums exploded. News outlets reopened the discussion. Legal experts weighed in. What they saw wasn't just a murder trial. It was a tangled web of power, timing, and fear. In 2016, post-conviction attorney Kathleen Zellner took on Stephen's case. She had already freed over a dozen wrongfully convicted individuals. But this case was different. Zellner didn't just appeal. She attacked. She recreated the crime scene, ran ballistics, mapped every movement. She questioned how burned bones showed signs of being moved. She discovered a bullet fragment that appeared after the original searches, raising doubts about how it got there. She presented alternate suspects, individuals with motive, access, and behavior patterns worth exploring. Then came a revelation, a century, one that had been withheld from the original defense, found deep in an evidence locker years later. On it, thousands of computer searches, some ordinary, others highly disturbing. But they weren't made by Stephen Avery. They were linked to another individual, someone who had regular access to the Avery property, someone who had never been charged, never investigated, never mentioned in court. The defense described it as the most crucial evidence the jury never saw. And yet, the system stayed silent. Why did the key appear only after multiple searches? Why was the vehicle found so easily after being missed by dozens of trained officers? Why did the garage show no signs of violence, if what Brendan described was true? And above all, why was evidence hidden, delayed, or never shared at all? As Kathleen Zellner continues to fight in court, one thing becomes clear. This story isn't over. It never was. Through all the controversy, it's easy to forget the heart of this story. Teresa, a daughter, a sister, a friend, whose life was taken far too soon. What happened to her was a tragedy, no matter who was responsible. But if the wrong people were blamed, then justice has yet to be served. Because now another woman has come forward. Her story is hauntingly similar. And it might be the final crack in a crumbling wall. Truth leaves a trace, even when someone tries to bury it, even when fire is used to erase it. We'll follow that trace all the way to the end. Will you?